now that we've got them mashing the ball and working with the ball. Let's say they're getting up to 9, 10, 11. Playing 7v7 and eventually 9v9. Um, what should their development be like going into those ages? Now that you're adding other things to it.
You want to hear something crazy?
Sure.
And Andy Barney, who I know I've mentioned to you a million times, the founder of the original KC Legends. Okay, he does not go more than 1v1 or 2v2 in practices until his teams are U16, U17, U18. That doesn't really answer your question, but I'm not that crazy yet. But just to give you a point, because I'm just saying he's sent a whole lot of players to higher levels and has a whole lot of really good teams at those ages. Because again, 2v2, or if you want to go 3v3, what is 7v7 or 9v9 or even 11v11? We'll go with 11v11 because you can get up to 4v4, but 11v11 is basically nothing more than at most 4v4 or 4v3 or 3v3 or 3v2 in all different areas of the pitch, right? And it all then just becomes connecting, right? So if you've got your outside mid and your center mid and maybe a fullback all in one area of the side of the pitch, okay? Now maybe your center mid turns and plays to the other center mid more centrally in the pitch. Now that center mid might have a forward and an outside mid and a fullback on the other side that they're connecting to, right? But other than the long switches, the 11v11 game is smaller sided games in smaller areas of the pitch all over. And same 7v7, obviously not. So it's just a matter of understanding, connecting. And again, not necessarily seeing the big picture, but your fullback maybe needs 7v7. What would you? When I was coaching the younger, we went 8v8 to 11v11.
Okay, well,
So I was just thinking off the top of my head what in order to help with the higher levels, what I would play in 7v7. I'd probably go 2-3-1. Okay, so let's say your left back might have a center mid and an outside mid and maybe the other defender, and that's really what all you have them thinking about. Does that make sense? And then if the center mid gets the ball, they've got their outside mid and maybe a forward, and that's all really that they're thinking about. I mean, does that make sense? And so obviously you have to spend a little bit of time in that type of environment, and at those ages you'll walk through what a whole formation might look like. I understand that you have to take some time, and look, one thing I'll tell you, I don't know the percentage, right, and how it switches. Like if you take him at 6-year-old and you're going 100% 1v1, I don't know, at age 7, is it 95-5, or is it 85-15? I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. That becomes the art of it. But I do know that we need to do a whole lot more of fewer players involved and more touches on the ball and more 1v1 and 2v2s, and I'll even grant you 3v3s than we do. But yeah, if I had a team 7v7, just to get them to have a little bit of understanding, I would take some time early in the season to kind of go through how that looks. But me, I would also probably then say, hey, parents, we're going to have an extra practice or two for the next couple of weeks and not take away from actual practice time. And then that also means both coaches and parents encouraging them getting work on the ball away from team practice. And no matter what you're doing or what coaches are teaching, team practice and travel ball is not nearly enough for a player to become the player they have the potential to be, right? If that's all you're doing, that's not enough. You're not going to get there. You're just not. But I'll tell you, when I had I think maybe I did it at U9, and you go through moves with them and ball work, and again, like you say, you're trying to teach them other stuff. And so they would have it. I actually created videos of what I showed them. and gave them all a copy of it, right? So they had what the scissor looked like and what a step over looked like, and all the different ball work, so they could do that stuff at home, and we could do some of that in warming up, and obviously in learning technically, because they may be doing it at home, but maybe it looks terrible, and so we still do ball work, but then a lot of 1v1, a lot of 2v2, and basically what I would do now is I would leave that last bit of practice for bigger. I would let bigger sided scrimmage, right? And that's where you can maybe stop, and coach that way and make suggestions. But I would do a lot of ball work, a lot of 1v1 and 2v2, and then as they get older, more experienced, maybe expanding that to 3v3 and 4v4, and full-on scrimmages for give them 15 minutes or whatever of that. One thing I did, and you can adapt this, I think, for any size, but like one thing I did for even 11v11 to get a lot of success in me passing stuff, but still get them a lot of work on the ball, is I would go 6v6, okay, with four, see if people can visualize this, with 4 players on the outside. So as neutrals for both teams. So the team with the ball, they're really going 10v6. And 6v6 in the middle would be 2-2-2. So if you can visualize that, if your team has the ball, you're playing a 4-4-2, right? But against only 6 defenders. So, when one team has the ball, 2 players on the outside are fullbacks for that team and the wide mids for that team, right? And then when the other team has the ball, they're kind of reversed. The fullbacks are now the wide mids. And so you've got a 10v6, you've got a 4-4-2, you've got a formation. You're able to get a lot of success in terms of teaching them to move the ball properly. Yet you're still getting a lot more touches in the middle because there's more space and they have more opportunity to challenge. And I still encourage taking players on and combining, like the 2 center mids. There's not a lot of traffic. They've got the other 2 center mids to work. So they can work on taking players on 1v1. They can work on combining in the 2v2 and overlapping each other. And you can do a lot of those things that you want to do in the bigger picture and have more success with it and still make it not as cluttered, if that makes sense.
Yes.
But go back to your own. I don't know the percentage. I don't know. Is it U17 where it becomes 50-50 and we're working on the 1v1 and 2v2, and the other 50 is 8v8 or what have you. It transitions surely as they get older, but I think it needs to transition a heck of a lot slower than how we do it now. In fact, I don't even think we don't do it now at all, is what I should say, because I can go out and look at the 4 and 5-year-olds out there, and right for Saturday or Sunday morning or whatever, and what are they doing? They're playing 4v4 and 5v5. Like that's where they're starting.
Yeah.
And you're hearing the people who are running it, spread out, don't bunch up, pass the ball. Well, heck, they don't know anything yet. They don't even know how to dribble, and you're already telling them to pass the ball. There's 10 players out there. They're 5. You think they can process that? They can't process that.
Yeah.
Let them play 2v2. Make more fields, right? You don't need a lot of space for 5 and 6-year-olds to play 2v2.
No.
And you don't need goals. You can use cones, right? If you don't have a whole bunch of pop-up goals, use cones. And speaking of with finishing, one thing I did a lot with my players when I shouldn't even say when they get older, even when they're a little younger, is that nutmeg game that we talked about. Well, even without it, but I would do tournaments sometimes in terms of, either straight up tournaments or the whole idea of promotion relegation, right? I would set up, 5 or 6 little fields for 1v1 and, name them. And of course, the very top league, the best in the world would be MLS, of course, right? But no, but, I would have it something like La Liga and, EPL and the idea is to win and move up. You lose, you move down. But what I would do for goals, I'd make it a very small area, and the goals would be, I would simply sit a ball on a cone. And that was the goal, instead of giving them because that, I'm trying to get them, again, the idea of being creative and 1v1 play and not so it's not long enough where they can beat someone with speed. And they also can't just blast the ball from right in front of their own goal, right? But it also gets them in terms of finishing. I mean, if they're playing and they have to hit another ball to score, they're going to learn to pass, right? Like technically, they're going to be able to pass. So I think you asked a question to get me to that. I don't remember what it was, but oh yeah, I was told about when you transition, and yeah. So I do think you build on. I think you always have to have that core of that 1v1 and 2v2 play, no matter what their age is up through high school, because it's the foundation, right? And then when and how much you transition is the art. I think the key thing for me is, as long as you have that core and you're spending a lot of time in 1v1, 2v2, if maybe you're transitioning a little more than a younger age than I would, I mean, why? Maybe you'll more success, but as long as you're still always building on that foundation, what you don't want to do is give them that foundation at 6 or 7, and then when they're 8, 9 years old, all you're doing is team stuff, right? And everything's 5v5 and 7v7 and passing rules, and play 1 touch, play 2 touch. Because that's the other thing too. You still, even when you go to the bigger games in what you're doing in your practices, is you still need to encourage 1v1. You still need to encourage your players to take players on. Because even if you're teaching, because mentally it's an issue for all, because they're surrounded with pass. Which is another thing I found funny in talking about rondos, which for anyone who doesn't know is basically possession games. And there are a million different ways you could set them up. But I remember hearing somebody say that they love them so much because they teach everything about the game except 1v1 and finishing. And I'm thinking to myself, well, heck, 1v1 and finishing is what we need to teach. So maybe we're doing it backwards, because that's the more difficult stuff to master. And again, rondos are offsetting numbers, right? You always have, however you're doing it, there's always extra players on offense. Yeah. Whether it's 4v4 plus 4 or just straight up 6v4 or whatever it is. Well, you give me a few years of teaching players how to play 1v1 and 2v2, they're going to do just fine in 6v4. Right? I mean, does that make sense?
Yes.
It's just, I said it a million times, it's the foundation of the game, and it's the most difficult thing to master. And so that should be what we're teaching at young ages. But
let's take a little bit of a left turn here, and you talk a lot about fitness, and as the kids get older, let's say get into their preteen and teen years, as parents we start worrying about, well, do we need agility and fitness training? And the kids are starting to go to 11v11. And one thing I noticed, when the first year the kids went to 11v11, a lot of kids just almost dropped out immediately.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because fitness, they be worn out in the first half. And
yeah. Oh, absolutely. The field become huge.
So, I know you're a big fitness guy, and you talk a lot about agility and strength and speed training. So, I'm just going to open it up and let you talk about what kids should be doing, once they get older and start transitioning to the full field game.
Okay. Yeah. And to that point, what's interesting and I think crazy, unfortunately, I don't have a solution for it, because I know it's the way it is in terms of field availability and space and all that. But when you think about it, they go, what is it, youth 13 now, I think is standard for 11v11. Yeah, it was crazy. When I started coaching my current U18s, I think it was U10 or U11 when they were going to transition to 11, which is nuts. And it was funny. I mean, me, when we were U10, I think we were supposed to go 11v11 next year, and they were talking about pushing it off. I wrote like a 30-page paper that I sent to the board of the league about why we can't do it. Did all the research on how many touches players get and all that. But to my point, to the point about the conditioning and fitness, and it's crazy. These kids go U13, and a lot of them, they play on a lot of fields that are bigger than some of the, adult fields. Now, maybe not like in the EPL. And one thing that stands out is I think I was watching Seattle one time in the NWSL, and they had the goal. They play on turf, or at least they did. And they have the goal, so you can see, where it is. The goal was halfway in the end zone, right? So it was 110 yards. Well, when we went to 11v11 in U13, we played on a lot of 120-yard fields. So we got 12-year-olds playing on longer fields than professionals, right? And 12-year-olds, by the way, that don't have the technical ability to spread out properly and use that size field. That's a whole nother issue. But yeah, they drop. And there's first of all, and you and I have talked about this before separately, but kids don't play anymore. Okay, so none of them are in shape. By the time they hit U13, they're getting into the teens. Conditioning becomes an issue. You don't just naturally get to sit around for a few months and then jump into 11v11 competitive soccer. You can't do it anymore. All right, but they try to. Yeah. Right, and they don't play anymore. Again, not to be the whole when I was your age thing, but you and I can talk about, when we were that age, we were outside all the time. Right, we were playing all the time. We come from the generation of, if it's summer, hey, I'm out in the morning, maybe see you at dinner, and then back out, and we'll be in at dark. Yeah. Right? All day, every day. Right? Now they're tapping on their phones. Right? So we maybe could get away with it a little more. But that's because we were actually active and doing stuff. We were out running around, riding bikes, whatever it was. We weren't sitting around. And I remember, I think it might have been U12. I think we were going into U12. We actually, for the first time, we decided in the summer, a little bit of their break, we were going to get out, once or twice a week to do that type of stuff. We'd let them actually just free play soccer too, but we would start out with some conditioning stuff, body weight exercises and stuff like that. And it was shocking to me, beautiful. First of all, we start out with a simple mile jog, right? Yeah. And again, these are supposed 11 and 12-year-old athletes, right? These are athletes. These aren't the kids sitting around doing, or supposedly not sitting around doing nothing. And some of them couldn't complete a mile. Like they couldn't complete a mile, let alone a time. Yeah. There wasn't one good time, but there were some that couldn't even complete it. And then we tried to do, simple body weight stuff. Players couldn't do a body weight squat. They didn't have the strength to do a body. Whereas again, when you're outside all day, every day, and you run and play and jump and sprint, and you're sitting. Sometimes you're just hanging out in front of you and you're talking. You're sitting in the bottom position of a squat for 10 or 15 minutes. Yeah. Right? Like naturally, that's, you do, these kids could, all right, let's do a bear crawl, something that could be kind of fun. We're going to race and do a bear crawl. They didn't even know what a bear crawl was, let alone be able to do it for 5 yards. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, they need to do a little bit of conditioning, right? It's so important. And one thing I was saying, look, fatigue makes cowards of us all. And when you're wiped out on the soccer pitch, you can't perform well, right? You can't. You cave. You don't make that sprint you need to make to stop the other team from scoring. You don't make that sprint you need to make to support the player with the ball to get a goal scoring opportunity, because your mindset, that's enough. So simply being in better shape also makes the game easier, right? The better your conditioning, the easier the game is. Because guess what? You're going to have a lot of players in the other team who aren't in shape. They're going to be sucking them. And that's a great opportunity for you if you're not. Let me tell you, it's a lot more fun to suffer away from the game and enjoy playing the game than it is to suffer during the game, right? To your point, I had a player a couple years ago, I think it was the year before lockdown. We played a showcase tournament, I think it was last weekend in July. And it was a last weekend in July weekend, okay? It was in the 90s all weekend, not a cloud in the sky. And I had a player to almost quit soccer, and that's because they didn't do anything between the end of the season, which I think our last game was like June 11th, right? And then the tournament was July 25th, 26th, 24th, right around there. And other than when we got together for some practices to sharpen up before, because I understand needing time, but they didn't do anything on their own to stay in shape, which also, by the way, is a lot easier than getting in shape.
Oh yeah.
Right. But that's what I'm saying. That's what lack of conditioning will do to you mentally. Right. To the point where you're going to quit a sport you love because you suffered so much. Right. That's no good. And it doesn't take a ton. If you're doing I'm not going to sugarcoat and think, conditioning is easy. It's not easy, but also if you're doing it right, and once you get into shape, it's a lot easier to stay in shape. Look, anyone who knows that who's lost weight, right, and gets fit, it's a lot easier to keep the weight off than it is to lose it, right? Now, unfortunately, a lot of people lose the weight and they think, I can go back to living my life the way I did. That's not true. But it is a lot easier to stay in shape, whether it's losing weight or conditioning for a sport, than it is to get there. Okay. And to that point, the funny thing is, when you do it and you go, through that tunnel or wall or however you want to look at it, you'll probably find yourself wanting to do it again and wanting to suffer because of what it's done for your game. Because I've had people come to me with my kid's on Dominate Game Day, which is a conditioning book. They're on it for the second time, third time, fourth time. They've done it 3 times, and now they've got some of their teammates out, and they're doing it a 4th time. And it's not easy. I mean, I'm not gonna say it's not easy, but it's also, look, players have other things to do in their lives, and they are also hopefully have other things to do with soccer, right? So, I think in the conditioning program that I have, which is only 4 days a week, right, and 2 of them are with a ball. Okay, so you're getting a lot of touches too. Well, I think the longest one might be 40 minutes maybe, and there's a lot of rest involved too, right? Because you're doing a lot of trying to mimic the sport of soccer, which is not steady state jogging, right? That's why I just emphasize that, because it still kills me how many people are so ridiculously old school, and that go out and run 3 miles every day, go out and run 5 miles every day. That'll get you in shape for soccer. And then coaches that do it too. It won't. Okay. I think Mondays, it's a 4-week program, and every Monday is sort of that little bit of base, that little bit of endurance and aerobic work. But I still, on those Mondays, no one ever does more than 3 miles, and it's a build up to that. And because that's not really where the work is. Soccer's not that sport. Soccer is a whole lot of varying distance sprinting with a whole lot of different length recovery periods that are sometimes walking, sometimes a slow jog, sometimes a 3/4 jog, and sometimes the recovery is actually a run, just not a sprint. All right, but it could be 30-yard sprint, 10-yard jog, 20-yard sprint. Get to stand there for 5 seconds, 30-yard sprint, 50-yard 3/4 run. You know what I mean? I'm just making numbers up. That's how soccer is. And so you have to mimic that with your conditioning, which is a lot of what I do. And I say, get that with the ball too. That's the other thing. You got to improve with your ball work too. I mean, I can't talk about mastering the ball and then give you a conditioning program with no touches. So you have a day that's kind of steady state, 2 different types of workouts with the ball in terms of the length of intervals and rest periods and stuff, and 1 very hardcore sprint interval day. And I say that because that's the feedback I've gotten. That's the 3rd workout of the 4 workouts every week. I get told, man, that workout number 3, workout number 3 is a killer. And supposedly week 3, workout 3 is the worst. And I'm walking the walk. I'm going through it right now. I'm in the middle of week 2. All right. So I'm doing it. Okay. So people, if I can do it, your 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old players can do it. Okay. And I guarantee you, if you condition properly, it doesn't take a lot of time, and you're going to feel so much better about how you perform in games. Because it's not a lot of fun to be sucking wind after your first sprint of a 90-minute game, or I guess 80 minutes at that age. But you understand my point.